Oh, thank you.
Is it cold in here? Yeah, it is chilly. How's this work? Let's see if I can find out.
You ready? All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to this committee meeting of the Committee of Finance, Taxation, and Assessment, and the extended title is apt for our conversation today. I'm joined by fellow committee members, Councillor Hogan, Councillor Paniagua, Councillor Monto. We have President Hudson with us. We're additionally joined by Councillor Geathers, Councillor Nave, Councillor Jones-Rouser, and we have with us Commissioner Matt O'Jay and Commissioner Michael Collins. So, gentlemen, I just wanted to call this meeting. We had on our last agenda a couple items related to a tax shelter agreement at the Maria Regina property up on the north side, and wanted a little bit more information for myself as a new councillor and a little bit more for my colleagues before we move forward with those items. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Councillor. So we don't have anything formal prepared for you today. Happy to answer questions, but I think this is a good opportunity both to talk about the exemption program, which we haven't in a long time, in spite of the fact that everybody who preceded you saw probably an unprecedented number of requests come before the last council. But in the context of Maria Regina, we'd love to answer any specific questions about too. This is a really exciting project. Obviously, it's a property that, in this context, was off the tax rolls virtually forever, was purchased, was the subject of litigation, and has begun a really unfortunate cycle of decay under the existing ownership. We've got a group from Rochester who's come in with a terrific...
Cut you off. Who owns it now?
It's owned by, I believe, the Kimberly LLC. Mark Conjul, I believe, is the principal behind that company.
Who has been in hiding?
He's not been in communication with our office that I know of.
Yeah.
I know my predecessor settled litigation with him in about 19. But obviously, yeah, the district councilor would know that the deterioration of the property has happened.
The empty promises.
Yeah.
He had promised all this, what he learned, and he did nothing. He fleeced the taxpayers. My comment.
So, waiting in the wings is a really reputable developer who has a good proposal for this property that certainly, don't want to speak for my colleague in NBD, but I think provides a product that we really need in our community and really need up in Court Woodlawn, and does so with a public abatement mechanism that I think is relatively equitable and progressive. That is the shelter rent, and specifically the Article 11 under the Private Housing Finance Law exemption. This is St. Anthony's developer, that's right.
So if it's useful, I can give a brief overview of the project, and then we figured between the two of us, we could tag team questions that have to do with financing the project, wherever you guys want to go with this.
Can I just ask, do we have a handle on how much we've spent actually cleaning it up? How has that been going?
So we can get you a number on that. We spend a little over, I think it's about $2,500 every 15 days on cut and clean. That gets billed to the owner. When that bill doesn't get paid, it immediately rolls over onto taxes. So we will collect no matter what.
So has the owner just completely stopped any sort of maintenance on the property?
No, they haven't stopped any type of maintenance, but they have not done they have not met bare minimum. But I wouldn't say that they've done nothing. They are occasionally somewhat responsive.
I think it's important for the context here to talk about what the condition of the property is right now, exterior and what the interior looks like too. I'm sure people have been following it in the news, but I think it's important for us before we start talking about moving into that agreement, paint the picture of what it looks like right now.
So right now we've got a situation where across the entire property we've got multiple buildings that have had significant issues with being broken into. And damage to windows, damage to having material stripped out of them. The chapel is a great example. And I think that the chapel is also a really strong example of where home leasing is coming in and trying to do more than what we see with a typical developer. We worked with them so that last week we were able to get the stained glass windows to the chapel all boarded up. And home leasing is volunteered to cover the cost of doing that, which was, for us, it felt really good to be able to make sure that we're able to protect those windows. Hopefully the neighborhood can see that was a cost that home leasing didn't have to bear. So, so being able to make sure that we go through there regularly. Brian Eisenberg, who's Assistant Director of Code Enforcement, is on that property all the time. We'll take care of what they don't take care of, what the owner doesn't take care of, and then we bill them. But it does continue to have challenges.
Is the church included as part of the whole project?
So the chapel itself is something that did not lend to housing development, which is where the funding for New York State is. And so, as Councilor Nave is aware, they've managed to partner with a Northside church that is looking to be able to buy the chapel as part of the deal with home leasing and redevelop it. When this first came to the Planning Commission for some of the permissions that it needs for development, the group from the church showed out en masse. It was really impressive public show of support.
That kind of the way they did with St. Anthony's, because I know the church is still the church, and the back of the building is homeless.
So the similar in the fact, and Deputy Commissioner Eric Ennis can probably get into a little bit more of the detail on it, but what is similar is that they are right next to each other. In that case, though, we owned the building. So we had control in a way that we just don't with this one.
Is that under the historical preservation?
It is nationally, it's not locally protected, so it's eligible for the tax benefits. But currently, if I recall, it's not otherwise, there's not a local designation on it.
Yeah, just Eric Ennis, Neighborhood and Business Development, to build off what Michael was sharing. So the St. Anthony's project was the convent of the church as well as the school itself. St. Anthony's continues to meet and regularly use that as a space for their congregation, but they had home leasing and built a really strong alliance and partnership with the church itself while that project was in the planning stages. But it was city-owned, and the city agreed to sell that building, and similarly, there was a shelter rent agreement established for that property as well.
When you asked about the historic, are you talking about Maria Regina?
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
there
so
it
it's protected. The being on the National Registry will allow it to access historic tax credits.
Now, does that include the chapel? Is that considered part of the National Register?
The site.
The whole
the,
site?
The whole
So
site.
that
is.
would include, it's gonna include the chapel as well? Okay. Now, when I went by there last week, I know some fencing was down again, so we're still having that issue.
I always reach out to myself,
Right.
Deputy Commissioner Jake Dishaw,
Yeah.
anytime you see something like that, and
Yeah,
let us know, because
it's-
we're by frequently, but we can't be there
No,
constantly.
I agree with you. I agree. And I was appalled when I walked into that church to see the mass card of Sister Mary desecrated, the Station's Cross just completely desecrated, and I saw beer cans. They went into the bathroom and smashed the bathroom to pieces. And that included now what they did with the organ. And I hear conflicting reports. Somebody will tell me, oh, the nuns wanted to stay, the nuns wanted to leave. And it's just very unfortunate that we have, but I'm very grateful that we've gotten together and want to preserve this project.
So that's where we're at right now, and the reason that together we're in front of you is that Home Leasing has proposed a project that, to their credit, they have had a tremendous amount of outreach with the neighbors. Honestly, the first time that it was out there, there was not strong support with it.
Right.
Just kind of a initial reaction to, hey, there's going to be affordable housing built here. What does that mean? They have met with the neighbors many, many times. We now have had a petition from the neighbors that has been written to all levels of government asking for support for the project. We're talking over 180 units of housing for older adults. that is using income averaging, so it will average out at about 60% of the area median income, just a touch under, but range from 30% up to 80% for people that live there. Yeah.
What's the breakdown of the, what size units?
A lot of studios and ones.
Okay.
Yeah, I say when it's older adults, we don't see large units. The 2 bedrooms become difficult to rent, and therefore, honestly, because of the funding mechanism, which is through New York State Homes and Community Renewal, it's difficult. They are very reluctant to underwrite and fund a project for seniors that's 2 bedrooms.
So upon approval, is there a time frame of when the project's going to be complete? Do we look at all of that, or?
So we're looking more at start date. Because the completion of the project can mean a few different things. One is when is it ready for your occupancy? We also have talked about the fact that the chapel is going to be divided off. So when is the entire campus redone? And we're looking right now from being able to do a groundbreaking and basically close on the financing end of this year, either side of December 31st. There's some legislation in Congress right now related to the low-income housing tax credit funding that's going to, if it passes, will actually speed up the closing.
And I don't know if this is correlation with Councilor Monto's question, but is there a floor plan available at all, or?
So home leasing is done, they've got some conceptual stuff. Until we get a bit farther along in the process, they're not going to get down into the fine details of every building just because they need to be able to get to a point where they've got assurances on the funding. They're close enough that they've come along. I can see what the latest is that they've got.
So, Michael, the LIHTC has already been approved for them, their low-income tax credits, they're still going for it?
Still going for it. So there's 2 types of low-income housing tax credits.
9%, 4%?
9% and 4%, and which, to those that are not in the world, are just 2 random numbers with a % sign after them. So
It's nice to say.
Yeah. So the basics of it are this: New York State, under IRS legislation, will allow for tax-exempt bonds to be allocated to a project as part of the total development, what we call the capital stack, but the financing for it. If the project has 100 units or more, as this does, this says over 180 units, you can apply on a rolling basis, and that is the 4%. And the funding for that, the timing for when you close on that, is a combination of when you can demonstrate you've got all of the other funding lined up, and when New York State has you on the list when it comes to their bond allocation. So when the money frees up from them from a bonding perspective.
So that money, is that enough for everything, or are they going to need some gap financing too?
Low-income housing tax credits by itself is never really enough. Yeah, so we're a variety of different sources. Right now, the budget's about $125 million. It's a big budget, and there's still a gap there.
So where are they applying for the other money?
So they've applied to a variety of different New York State programs. We've got some a little bit of ESD funding that's been committed towards it, and also they'll do some private financing as well.
And obviously, the shelter tax income, that credit is based on what they've charged for the apartments, correct?
No, it's based on the unit makeup and the fact that they've got their regulatory agreement with the state. And they will be incorporated under Article 11. So this will be a Housing Development Fund Corporation, like every other
So
incorporated.
what percentage does the city end up getting with the shelter tax?
It would be close to that usual 10% of gross rents less utilities.
It's based on what they're charging for rents, right?
Well, in this case, and you'll notice that this request letter is different than virtually all of them, where we, I think for finance purposes, so that we have some stability in income and a little less administrative burden, we like to say either $550 per unit annually or 10% gross rents less utilities.
Okay.
In this case, we just went with the per unit value at the request of the developer. They think similarly to us, that gives them a little more predictability in terms of their liabilities.
Okay.
So we know that up front.
And they'll manage this, obviously, right?
Yeah, home leasing will be developer, and they will be the manager as well.
Can I touch base with the parking facilities? With parking, I mean, how many vehicles will be enough to be parking within the facility?
Considering what the expected rate of car ownership will be for their base, because this is not a population that owns, one car per person or even one car per apartment. Also, because of where it is, and it's pretty wonderfully walkable neighborhood that it's in, parking on site is expected to be able to handle.
They'll have the room if a bus wants to take them to the store.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, gentlemen, ladies, can I have the mic? So the actual item in front of us is the shelter rent agreement with a 15-year term. Would you mind, one of the two of you, I'm not sure who wants to field this one, going into a little bit of the kind of like the wonky detail of what a shelter rent agreement is, differentiation from pilot, and then I'm guessing that the gap financing is contingent upon the council passing this legislation?
So the gap, Matt is the expert on all this stuff. When it comes to the LIHTC, it's not the gap financing, but the actual low-income housing tax credit. New York State requires there to be a pilot or a shelter rent agreement or something of that type in place during their underwriting, or it won't go forward.
It's infeasible without. Not only the lack of income coming in, but the starting point. This is not a ground-up de novo development. This is not a downtown or University Hill development. This sort of neighborhood development, market rate or affordable, is infeasible without some kind of abatement. In this case, you mentioned the pilot. These have been used interchangeably by developers, not by us, for a very long time. You could think of it as a small P pilot. It is a payment in lieu of taxes. There's a really important distinction between this and a typical pilot that would come through an IDA, and this does get way too wonky. I apologize. Please don't glaze as quickly as I would glaze if I were in your seat. That is, the assessment roll is divided up into several different roll sections. Roll section 1 is what all of us pay on. It is what every year when you vote on the budget, the levy comes out of. Roll section 8 is wholly exempt. It is your nonprofits. It is your IDA-owned property. It does not include shelter rent properties. Shelter rent properties, even though they are fully abated, do pay into the same pie that we do. That their assessed value does go into the calculation that Tim and everybody go through every April in preparing numbers for you. And so through this prism, this is as equitable as it gets, I think, for a heavy exemption. It provides something we need. It gives the developer what it needs, because, again, these are very expensive projects that nobody else would tackle. But at the same time, it doesn't unfairly shift the burden to any of us or any other of the 31,000 property owners in the city who pays into roll section 1.
So is there a cost to the city?
This is a great question. And there is no good answer to it. I was prepared for it, but
Yes,
there's no good answer.
I tipped you off to this one.
Is there an opportunity cost by not going with something else? I would say there's nothing else out there. I think Michael would say there's nothing, and if Eric is hiding behind the podium, he would definitely say there's nothing else out there. A private developer has had to go with this for a long time, and there's just no way to make those numbers work. So it's a popular question to say, well, what are we foregoing by abating this or exempting this? And my sense is nothing. I think we're foregoing an $800,000 demo of beautiful historic buildings by the city in 3 years if home leasing were not to come out of the wings and offer this.
But I think it's incumbent now for us to provide housing. I mean, we're in a housing crisis. It's a big plot of land that nobody's ever done anything with. This private developer has just dropped the ball completely on it. It's a blight in the neighborhood. And, and we need housing, especially this type of housing.
So for every cost that we incur that we're able to put over to the developer, there is a surcharge on it, so generally it takes care of things. But we still have so much attention from city staff to the property that's not recoverable. And then, yeah, what's it doing to drag down property values in the neighborhood? I mean, basically, what we're foregoing is opportunity from a housing perspective, from an economic development perspective, from a diversion of resources perspective. It's opportunity.
Piggybacking on Councilor Hogan, 3 years from now, if we don't do something, it's gonna be demolished. And then we're still gonna have to pick up the cost of the demolition. Well, one quick question I wanna ask you, so once they develop this, right, are they gonna have the services like they have with the other senior apartments? Are the services gonna be provided?
So there's services in a slightly different direction than I think that you're considering, and that's that they've partnered with Access CNY to be able to provide services and housing specifically to some older adults that have some special needs. Overall, though, it's an independent. The expectation is it's sort of like the independent living type situation. So the people that are there qualify by age and by income, but like the rest of us, are fully independent.
And then I'm gonna ask this question, and it may be a little off, but in my brain it's not. Because I've worked in the different spectrums of volunteering, and when you volunteer, you see a lot of different people coming through, like the Samaritan Center and things like that, and a lot of them are older adults. And have we looked to see how many older adults are unsheltered out here?
So so it's a great question. The Homeless Housing Coalition, and specifically the Continuum of Care, has those numbers. There's a Homeless Management Information System database that is funded through the ESG grant, and so they've got the data within that of everybody that is presented in one way or to another to a agency that serves people that are homeless, and it's got the demographics on everybody. We specifically used some of the home ARP allocation that we received to fund 8 units of housing over at the New Catholic Charities Men's Shelter that's permanent apartments for frail elderly that are at the risk of homelessness, and they are permanent. It's permanent housing. Okay,
and you said age and income, but disability is in there as well, right?
For the apartments where Access CNY is the partner.
And I have had the opportunity to see a great deal of the plans for this property. It is a really nice plan. It has gone through historic preservation, so that I was on that board at the time. To Marty's comment, as far as the parking will be, it's going to be different. It's going to be like in a circular area towards the Grant Boulevard side of the property. And it also opens up lanes for ambulance, vans, things like that. So it does widen it.
But those are two of the most major inner.
Yeah. And it also has, they've added a component for an elevator that is kind of like built onto kind of like the outside of the building, but it's still encapsulated. So it's a really good plan. So I don't know if Historic Preservation has that, if anybody wanted to see it, or just contact them, but it's nice. It's nice.
I mean, I think it's important for us to state that it's a unique property, right? It sits inside, it's completely surrounded by a neighborhood of residential houses. It was a flourishing, a college, daycare center, preschool, bingo on Sundays when I was a kid. I mean, the cost to the city of letting it sit there and rot is much higher than any other cost, and that's just me speaking, but it just sits at a corner that the people that live all around it, it's sad.
Yeah.
And I think it recognizes a need too, and I hear this all the time, I'm sure my fellow councilors hear it too, is that a lot of times seniors want to, they want to downsize, but they want to stay in the neighborhood they grew up in and they love.
Yeah.
And this fulfills that need quite a bit. And also, it might free up some other houses for some young families in that neighborhood too. I know at St. Anthony's, that parish is still, a lot of those folks have been going there for 60, 70 years. They love what home leasing's done there. And it's actually become a center of Spanish-speaking Catholics too, because they have a Spanish Mass down there. So, I mean, I think this is a great solution for.
Yeah, I agree. The home leasing did a wonderful job with that project and have maintained it quite well.
But with home leasing, and I hope it doesn't happen with this, we ran into a couple of hurdles when it came to the financing with home leasing too. I don't know if you guys were around.
So every project is going to run into financing hurdles.
And it took us longer to move it forward.
Which is where we're at right now with this project. I mean, this is, complicated projects have complicated financing structures. And right now, it's still a gap. This part of the process that we're talking about right now allows them to demonstrate to New York State that this is a project that the city supports. Nothing says true support, such as financial support. And frankly, we've been able to, a lot of talks with New York State Homes and Community Renewal and recognize to them, we've got 3 priority projects in Syracuse. It's Syracuse Developmental Center, East Adams, and Maria Regina. Like these are our 3 primary large projects, and we value them, and they've said, hey, we hear you.
And in respects to Madam President and Councilor Hogan and all the other councilors' comments, we know the necessity of it. We know that we need things like this. My biggest concern for myself is just making sure that we're ensuring that we can, these developers can sustain and have sustainable things, as far as finances and things like that. Because far too long we've been having projects throughout the city, and they just end up like that project or many other projects that we have where sustainability is just not there, and it's just costing us, to Councilor Monto's point, costing us more money just to maintain that stuff.
So from my standpoint, the rigorousness that you have to go through when you are applying for a low-income housing tax credit application, if you're going to be successful in that, you're showing for 15 years out what you're looking at from operating costs, operating revenue, and what do we look like at that point? Because the New York State doesn't want to get into a situation where they've got their name on a project that has 5 years of restrictions still on it, but it's it doesn't look like it's maintained. So they've been really rigorous on it. Home leasing, honestly, HCR has been pretty clear with us that home leasing is one of the agencies that they think very highly of, and that's because they've had a number of successful projects across the state.
I think that they also did the State Fair Boulevard.
I think that was Healy.
That was, yeah, with,
in conjunction
it was another Rochester developer.
Oh, okay.
And I'll remember it by the end of the day.
So in terms of the 180 units, do you know what the leasing process looks like, and is it anticipated to, all 180 units would be leased upon completion, or what's the timeline for that? And have you heard floated a figure in terms of rent that individuals would be paying per month at the site?
Yeah, so generally speaking, lease up begins when they've got the finish line in sight, because they're not trying to have people in a situation where they've promised them an apartment in September, they run into something, and now somebody's got to find a place for 2 months because their other lease is up, or they sold their home. So when they've got a really strong idea of when they're going to be able to start actually having units occupied, when they're going to be able to get the certificate of occupancy from the city, that's when they go with the lease up. They also probably, I suspect, have a waiting list from their St. Anthony's property that they would be able to pull from. I'd defer to them on that question, but that's typical. A great example of it from a downtown perspective, you look at the Chimes building that has been in the news with connection to the Allen family. They've got a 300-person, 500-person waiting list for the 26 units over at Salt City Market, right? So that'll come through pretty quickly. Remind me of the other question. Rent rolls.
Yep.
Yeah, so they are, we do have idea that's going to shift by the time they get to completion, but the math is the same. So basically, New York State's going to regulate that the occupants are going to spend on average 30 to 40% of their income, and since they are they're averaging at 60% AMI for the apartment, it's going to be based off of that. So HUD offers what those rent rolls are, but it changes on an annual basis.
Isn't 30% of income on housing considered an economic red flag in terms of where You're pushing
It's,
in.
it's an interesting, these are New York State rules, not City of Syracuse rules. Yeah.
Gonna give them pickleball?
I have no idea, Council President.
They will have a nice courtyard with a garden and everything. I didn't know that part.
You know, Councilor Hogan made a good point that I think shouldn't be lost. It doesn't get talked
Say that again.
about.
Could you say it?
Well, you know, broken clocks and all.
Don't say anything.
Filtering. This is adjacent to one of the largest middle-class residential neighborhoods in the city, primarily
Lawn,
detached, Court Woodlawn, a lot of detached single-family homes. We're in a real estate market now that has no inventory and hasn't for the better part of 2 years. Every senior who's overhoused, our staff can't quantify this, Michael's staff probably has some numbers on this to back it up, but every senior who's overhoused, many of them want to be elsewhere, as you've said, would love to be in a place like this. How do we free up inventory for other would-be home buyers, get seniors into appropriate housing that they can afford and won't turn into a catastrophic financial situation for them in 4 years? This is the way to do it.
We heard that at those meetings that we had up at McChesney. You know, there's some people that said, I'd love to stay in the neighborhood, but, you know, I'm having trouble with my house.
And that's also come up within the housing strategy work that we've been doing, that you've been participating in. That, you know, that idea of, you know, when you provide an opportunity that meets where someone is now, then they can move on from what worked for them back then, and that opens it up for other families looking.
Yeah, I just think my biggest concern is always what Councilor Gathers and President Hudson were getting to. We move 180 arguably vulnerable people to one corner. We have to make sure we're supporting that after with services, because that's, you know, it's a lot of people in one spot. So
if you look at what we've got right there, so Vanette Towers is really close by, Tops obviously right behind there. I think that we do have, one of the beauties of this neighborhood is the fact that it's, you know, it's a vibrant neighborhood. It's actually made the financing harder because they are across the street from a qualified census tract from an income level. The project itself is not, you know, it's in a more stable economically census tract. And so it has not qualified for some funding that it would if it were across the street.
have they done outreach where, are we seeing neighborhood pushback at all at this point of the project? Have they done?
Well, so there was, initially there was neighborhood pushback because the thought was, hey, we don't want to see affordable housing here. We want to see, you know, a lot of people saying, I wouldn't economically qualify. I want something I can see myself in. And home leasing came back in and said, we hear you. Here's what we believe we can do. Talked to New York State and said, hey, do you think we could work with you to be able to underwrite some market rate units? Honestly, the funding gap is really too massive, and for that to have been able to work, I give them credit. We went through the numbers with them. They really did take a stab at being able to do that. But what it costs to be able to build without subsidy means that the rent that you're going to have for those units is so far above market rate for this area that it becomes an unmarketable unit. But to the point I was making earlier, that their engagement has now led to the fact that last year we did see the neighbors create a petition that was collected a ton of signatures that was imploring everybody from the city of Syracuse to the feds to support home leasing's project. And that doesn't mean that every single person over there loves it. I don't recall a time where we've had this much strong support, not just to do something, but to do what's proposed. It's as far as the breadth of support for the project.
Anybody else?
I want to say thank you. And yeah, I want to just comment that, yeah, I think at the start, there's a lot of negative things because the immediate fear is crime and drugs, and I understand that. So that comes on a lot of projects, but we got so many people in their 70s and 80s that I met with one family today, and they're not selling their house. You know, they feel the comfort, but there's those who want to downsize and say, here, we want to sell this home to our children, keep it in the family, and we'll move something that's more convenient. You don't have to deal with the maintenance of the house, which is good. So this is it's a great project, and everyone's to be commended for this project, for pushing this forward.
Looking forward to the groundbreaking and then looking forward to the ribbon cutting on it. It's going
And
to be good.
hopefully we get invited, because we don't get invited to a lot of stuff.
We will make sure you are invited. Absolutely. We'll have a party.
Okay, and one more question,
Yeah.
off this topic, because the same person, I do believe, owns the Babies R Us warehouse, right?
No,
This is his brother.
no, that's
That's
court.
Core.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, because I'm ready to get into them too. Okay.
All right. Gentlemen, with that, we thank you for your time, and
Thank you.
this is adjourned. Thank you.
That's just sitting right in the middle of everything in the inner harbor, just there. Right.